Hey everyone! Tonight we're diving into mysteries that live on the edge between legend and reality. We'll begin with the strange disappearances inside the Great Lakes Triangle, Basley, where ships, planes, and even people have vanished without a trace. From there, we'll climb into the frozen peaks to explore the chilling rumors surrounding the Yeti. And finally, we'll descend into the deep ocean to confront the haunting legends of monsters said to lurk in the darkness below. So before you settle in and get comfortable, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy these journeys into the unknown. And don't forget to leave a comment letting me know where you're watching from tonight. It's always fascinating to see us connected from all around the world. Now, dim the lights, let the room fall quiet, and let's step together into tonight's mystery. Number 1. Vanishings of the Great Lakes Triangle. A biting wind rushed in from the bay, making the sailors shiver as they hurried to ready their vessels for departure. From a higher vantage point on the pier, Colonel Russell watched the shadowy figures scurrying across the decks, preparing equipment for the long journey ahead. Even beneath his thick military cloak he felt the chill, and he could not help but pity the men who had little protection against the merciless grip of nature. Winters on Lake Superior could be brutally unforgiving, and that was perhaps one of the reasons why these men were so eager to set sail. Meteorologists had warned of violent storms in the week to come. Russell had summoned the captains of the 3 ships to his office the night before, pleading with them to delay their departure until the danger had passed, but they had firmly refused. These were minesweepers, built at Fort William to be delivered to the French Navy, tasked with clearing German mines from the English Channel. They were not elegant vessels, but they were rugged and dependable, constructed with steel hulls and watertight compartments. Each bore the name of a celebrated French victory: Inkerman, Sebastopol, and Sirius. The Canadian officer sighed as he watched the first minesweeper slip away from the dock. He understood the importance of these ships to the war effort, and he sympathized deeply with the crew's longing to return home after so long apart from their families. But if the decision had rested with him, Russell would never have allowed them to depart. Born and raised in Thunder Bay, Russell carried the icy waters of that place in his veins, as did so many of the locals. He had seen far too many ships leave port never to return, attended too many funerals where the coffins had to be weighed down with stones because no bodies were inside. The vast lake that bordered Ontario seemed to conceal a secret, perhaps even a malevolent force lurking unseen, ready to strike the moment sailors grew careless or complacent. For those who had navigated these waters for generations, the journey was already perilous enough. For a foreign fleet, it was something far worse. At last, the final vessel pulled away from its berth, sounding its horn in farewell. In the days that followed, as Russell carried on with his routine duties, his thoughts lingered on the French ships and the men who sailed them. And then, before long, his worst fears were realized. Both Inkerman and Sirius vanished, never to be seen again. It is not uncommon for places where people vanish without a trace to be given the title of a triangle, and the names attached to such places carry their own weight of dread, names like Bermuda, Alaska, or Bennington. In the case of the Great Lakes Triangle, which also encompasses the twin vortices of Michigan and Marysburg, the hazy boundaries of this region are said to be formed by 3 cities: Winnipeg, Louisville, and Burlington. The legend of the Great Lakes Triangle may trace its beginnings back as far as October of 1892, when 3 ships mysteriously disappeared within the span of a single month. Then, on November 21, 1902, the SS Bannockburn was sighted for the last time by another vessel as it drifted into a thick bank of fog near Isle Royale. The freighter and its crew of 20 men vanished forever. 16 years later, a group of 3 newly launched French minesweepers was making its way toward the Sioux Locks en route to the Atlantic. When a violent storm descended upon them, the Sebastopol was separated from her sister ships, the Inkerman and the Sirius. Those last 2 vessels, along with 78 men aboard, never reached the locks, and to this day, not a single trace of wreckage has ever been recovered. Yet not every mysterious disappearance on the Great Lakes provoked speculation about unseen forces or deadly phantoms lurking across the waters. Sometimes, It was the discovery of a vessel in an inexplicable condition that left behind even deeper questions than an outright vanishing. The most famous example is that of the Rosabelle, a two-masted schooner built in the 1860s to ferry goods between Benton Harbor and Milwaukee. Her crew of 11 men had spent most of their lives plying this familiar route until their final voyage in the winter of 1921. On the morning of October 31st, a steamer entering Milwaukee Harbor came across the Rosabelle capsized. When the vessel was later raised and inspected by the Navy, not a trace of her captain or crew was found. At first, some speculated that the schooner might have collided with a larger vessel, but no reports of such an accident existed for that area at the time, and the ship's hull bore no signs of damage. Another theory suggested that a leak might have caused her to overturn, yet upon close examination, the hull remained intact. No cracks, no punctures, nothing to account for her fate. The disappearance of the Rosabelle's crew remains one of the strangest mysteries of the region, as though someone, or something, had plucked them from the water and flipped the vessel over. An even more baffling case would take place 16 years later, involving a freighter named the McFarland. On the evening of April 28, 1937, the ship was making its way through the lock system leading into Lake Michigan. At the time, the water was crowded with large ice floes, forcing the crew to exercise the utmost caution in order to avoid a collision. The captain of the McFarland was George Donner, a seasoned mariner held in the highest regard by his crew. He had stood for hours in the wheelhouse, refusing to rest until he was confident that the dangers had passed. At last, in the early hours of dawn, Donner felt assured that he and his men were safe, and he retired to his private quarters for some much-needed sleep. Before leaving the bridge, he instructed the second mate to wake him when they neared Port Washington. A few hours later, the sailor approached the captain's quarters, knocking repeatedly, but there was no reply. Others were summoned, and when the door was finally forced open, they were stunned to discover that the room was completely empty. What shocked them even more was the fact that the door had been locked from the inside. Though the cabin held no trace of its occupant, the captain's bed remained neatly made, showing no sign of having been slept in, while his pipe still lay upon the table nearby. There were no indications of a struggle, and no possible exit aside from the single locked door. It was as if the seasoned mariner had simply vanished from existence. No less perplexing was the disappearance of a Douglas DC-4 over Lake Michigan in the summer of 1950. The aircraft, identified as Northwest Airlines Flight 2501, was carrying 58 passengers from New York City to Seattle. At approximately 1:15 in the morning, the pilot radioed local air traffic control, requesting permission to descend to 2,500 feet due to worsening weather conditions. That would be the last transmission ever received. Moments later, all contact with the plane ceased, and a massive search effort was launched both by air and on the ground in hopes of finding the wreckage and the unfortunate souls aboard. Only a handful of fragments, believed to belong to the missing aircraft, were ever recovered. The main wreckage was never found. The disappearance of the DC-4 and its passengers became one of the worst aviation disasters in American history. Author Clive Cussler, famous for his fascination with maritime mysteries, went on to fund repeated search efforts. His team surveyed more than 500 square miles of lakebed, uncovering 10 previously unknown shipwrecks, but not a single trace of the doomed aircraft. In the days following the disaster, numerous witnesses came forward claiming to have seen strange lights hovering over the lake at the exact time contact was lost with Flight 2501. For decades, countless reports of unidentified flying objects have been logged across the skies of the Great Lakes, the most infamous occurring in 1994 when police switchboards were overwhelmed by calls reporting hundreds of eerie lights drifting slowly over Lake Michigan. One such UFO was even blamed for the disappearance of 2 American Air Force pilots dispatched to intercept it over Lake Superior in 1953. Yet some argue that what witnesses saw did not come from the heavens above, but from the depths below. In December of 2018, a father and son in Ohio observed a massive cylindrical object hovering above Lake Erie, plunging into the water and rising back up again multiple times. Theorists have suggested that such visitors to our world may have established bases beneath the lakes long ago, only occasionally emerging to observe humanity. For decades, American submarines have also reported encounters with objects moving at incredible speeds beneath the water, origins still entirely unknown. Could it be that the Great Lakes are concealing an entire colony of beings from another world? Beyond the theories of extraterrestrial visitors, whether from the skies above or the depths below, Other possibilities remain. Some believe that this region may mark a fault line between our dimension and neighboring realities, much like other notorious triangles scattered around the globe. According to this line of thought, the reason investigators fail to recover definitive wreckage is simple. It is not lying on the lakebed at all, but trapped within a parallel reality. Could it be that the unfortunate victims did not vanish from the face of the earth, but were instead transported into another existence entirely? Was it possible that the fog bank the Bannockburn sailed into carried it into another universe? And did Captain Donner step through into another reality the very moment he closed the door to his cabin? In 2007, divers stumbled upon a mysterious stone circle lying deep beneath Lake Michigan. Its arrangement bore an uncanny resemblance to Stonehenge in England. No one knows how the formation came to be, for it is clearly not a natural occurrence, and it may date back as far as 10,000 years. The inability to explain why such stones exist on the lakebed has inevitably fueled countless theories, many of them speculative. Some have claimed that it is a time portal, or perhaps a doorway into another reality. Its presence, by strange coincidence, mirrors the enigmatic structures long associated with the Bermuda Triangle. A more rational explanation has been proposed in the form of an unusual weather phenomenon observed in various parts of the region. Known as a microburst, it is a sudden, highly localized storm event in which rain and wind strike an area no larger than a single mile across, yet with gusts exceeding 100 miles per hour. Anything caught in its path would be subject to catastrophic damage. Because microbursts form and dissipate so quickly, and because their effect is confined to such small pockets, it is possible they occur far more often than we realize. Any ship or aircraft caught within one would almost certainly vanish, or be carried far beyond the point where its loss was recorded. It is believed that the number of vessels lost within the Great Lakes Triangle without satisfactory explanation may number in the hundreds, with thousands of lives disappearing along with them. In some cases, the wreckage of these craft has eventually been discovered, but with no bodies ever found inside. For the majority of disappearances, the most likely culprit remains the severe and unpredictable weather for which the Great Lakes are infamous. Most of these tragedies have taken place in storms, and in time, the wrecks are usually recovered, gradually unraveling the mysteries of their loss. And yet, the nature of certain events still defies every conventional explanation. Much like the stories we have already examined, it seems as though something unseen and elusive remains bound to these vast and unforgiving waters. Number 2. The haunting encounters with the Yeti. In the spring of 2019, a team of 18 soldiers from the Indian Army's Mountaineering Division embarked upon a 2-month expedition to conquer Mount Makalu, the 5th highest peak in the world. Having set out from the capital city of Delhi nearly a month earlier, they paused at a waypoint known as Langmail Karka in order to acclimatize to the thinning air before pressing on toward the Makalu base camp. It was there, close to their encampment, that they stumbled upon something wholly unexpected, an encounter that would chill them far more than the freezing winds ever could. The Makalu expedition of 2019, mounted by the Indian Army's mountaineering team, commenced on the 27th of March and formed part of a long-standing tradition. Similar ventures had been carried out for decades before, each serving as a commemorative gesture toward the victories won during India's 200-year struggle against British rule. Though the colonial yoke eventually came to an end, the sudden partition that followed unleashed vast migrations, fierce contests for power, and decades of bloodshed. The ever-present threat of foreign terrorism and violence within India's own borders has kept its army on constant alert. For this reason, the mountaineering divisions of the Indian Army are trained with extraordinary rigor, prepared not only for the challenges of combat but also for the demands of high-altitude warfare. Beyond sharpening martial skills, each successful expedition instills esprit de corps, nurtures courage, and carries forward the traditions of the armed forces into the next generation. The spring expedition of 2019 was led by Major Manoj Joshi and comprised 4 officers, 2 junior commissioned officers, and 11 other ranks. On the 2nd of April, after reaching the Himalayan foothills, the team began its trek toward the Makalu base camp. A week later, on the 9th of April, as they traversed a narrow valley within the Makalu Barun National Park, they paused at an elevation of 4,500 meters at a place called Langmail Karka, where they might allow their bodies to adapt to the thinning air. While encamped there, several members set out to reconnoiter the surrounding ground and made a discovery that left them utterly astonished. a trail of massive footprints pressed deep into the snow not far from their tents. Using their available mountaineering equipment to measure them, they determined that the largest print stretched to 81 centimeters in length and 38 in width, more than 3 times the size of an average man's foot. What unsettled them even further was the manner in which the tracks appeared, arranged in a linear fashion, as though made by a creature capable of walking upright. Each stride measured nearly 1.2 meters, whereas the average human step was little more than half that distance. The Indian soldiers realized at once that whatever had left such marks must have been of immense proportions. It was the first time an Indian army expedition had encountered such a multitude of prints, though perhaps it was not entirely unexpected. For 2 centuries, strange discoveries of this very kind, attributed to a mysterious being called the Yeti, had been reported by explorers and soldiers alike. Skeptics have long maintained that such tracks could only have been left by Himalayan brown or black bears. Attempts to collect samples of hair and hide in the region, believed by some to be remnants of the Yeti, have only deepened the doubt, for nearly all, if not everyone, of those samples has ultimately been identified as belonging to local bears or goats. Yet bears of the Himalayas move upon 4 legs, and their spoor bears little resemblance to the prints documented by the Army's mountaineering team. At least a portion of the soldiers believed that what they had seen belonged to something else entirely. These were men well acquainted with the signs of local wildlife, including bears. In comparison, a bear's track is easily recognized, marked by the pad of a bare foot and the distinct impressions of its claws. Whether or not those Indian soldiers truly placed their faith in the ancient legend of the Yeti, the fact remained that finding enormous footprints of an unknown creature pressed into the snow so near to their camp was hardly a comforting experience. Despite the skepticism of modern times, there was once an era when the Western world was captivated by stories of the Yeti, so much so that the United States Department of State issued formal guidance on the matter to its embassy in New Delhi. A dispatch dated the 30th of November, 1959, set out 3 regulations. First, any expedition undertaken in search of the Yeti required the payment of a royalty of 5,000 rupees to His Majesty's Government of Nepal for the issuance of a permit. Second, should the Yeti be encountered, it might be photographed or captured alive, but under no circumstances was it to be killed or fired upon except in the case of self-defense. All photographs, and indeed the creature itself, if taken dead or alive, were to be surrendered to the government of Nepal at the earliest opportunity. Third, all reports or news casting light upon the creature's actual existence were to be submitted directly to the government of Nepal and withheld from the press or the public without official sanction. Fast forward to 2019. Hoping their discovery would be treated with seriousness, the Indian Army posted the evidence upon its official Twitter account, seeking to stir public interest and perhaps prompt a thorough scientific inquiry into the strange tracks. As might be expected, much of the world's media responded with mockery and disbelief. But could there not be some kernel of truth behind the legend? From the moment the first Europeans set foot in Tibet and the greater Himalayan ranges, the local people spoke to them of a towering, mysterious creature. The earliest written reference dates back to 1832, when B.H. Hodgson, the British resident at the court of Nepal, recorded that native hunters had fled in terror after encountering a wild man covered from head to toe in dark hair. More than half a century later, in 1889, Major Lawrence Waddell of the Indian Army, a Scottish explorer and surgeon, encountered enormous tracks in the snow while climbing at an altitude of 17,000 feet near Sikkim. His local guides assured him that the prints were those of a creature called the Yeti, one fierce enough to attack human beings and even carry them away for food. They further explained that the best means of escape was to flee downhill, for the Yeti's long hair would fall forward over its eyes as it descended, blinding it temporarily and allowing a man the chance to get away. In truth, the legend of this creature is by no means confined to the frontier between India and Nepal, where the Army's mountaineering team encountered the tracks in 2019. Tales of the Yeti are found across nearly every mountain range of Asia. Reports of its appearance stretch from the Caucasus in the far west of the continent to the Himalayas in the south, from the Pamir Range lying just north of Afghanistan and Central Asia, all the way to the easternmost reaches of Russia, more than 7,200 kilometers to the northeast. In other words, the widespread skepticism of the Western world holds little meaning for the people who dwell in these regions. Those who live amid Asia's mountains pay no mind to the doubts of outsiders who have never set foot in their lands, yet presume to dismiss their testimony. Nor are they alone in such beliefs, for the modern world is filled with stories of similar beings, the so-called rock apes of Southeast Asia, the Mapinguari of South America, and the Sasquatch or Bigfoot of North America. Legends of the Yeti may well date back centuries, even millennia, before Europeans ever came to these mountains, carried down through generations by word of mouth. To those living in Western society, however, the tale of the Yeti is scarcely more than a century old. The legend of the abominable snowman first entered the mainstream in 1921, when members of the British Everest reconnaissance expedition reported sightings of such a creature. The team, led by Colonel Howard Berry, was engaged in the earliest attempt to scale the northern face of Everest when they discovered a series of unusual tracks. The colonel suggested they were likely those of an unusually large gray wolf. Yet, when the party was but 7 kilometers from the north face of Everest, crossing the Lakpa La Pass at an elevation of 6,850 meters, they were startled to see a number of large, dark figures moving in the distance, shadows etched starkly against the swirling snowstorm. The Tibetan porters with them insisted without hesitation that the shapes could not be wolves, but were clearly beings known as Yetis. In 1925, Nikolaos Tambazi, a Greek photographer attached to a British geological expedition, claimed he too had glimpsed a Yeti while trekking along the Zimu Glacier, the largest glacier in the eastern Himalaya of India. He swore he had come close to capturing its image. Called urgently from his tent by the porters, he saw a dark, upright figure several hundred meters away, seemingly unclothed, moving from one rhododendron bush to another, and at times uprooting them altogether. The strange being remained in sight for about a minute before vanishing into dense scrub. Burdened by the cumbersome photographic equipment of the day, Tambazi was unable to ready his lens before the apparition disappeared. A decade later, in 1937, the celebrated mountaineer Frank Smythe, one of the most distinguished climbers of the interwar years, ventured into the remote wilderness of Tibet. There, he too came upon a series of strange footprints pressed into the snow, each stride measuring at least 60 centimeters, equal to the full pace of a grown man. But what kind of person, possessing feet of such colossal size, would walk barefoot through snow? Following the trail, Smythe was astonished at the course it described. The creature had crossed ravines and icy gullies with the agility of an expert climber. His notes and photographs were later examined by the Zoological Society and the Natural History Museum, only to be dismissed with the conclusion that the tracks belonged to some unidentified species of bear. Smythe accepted this ruling, and indeed, the photographs he had taken did bear some resemblance to the spoor of a quadruped. That same year, amid clashes with Japanese forces, a Russian reconnaissance unit operating in Mongolia reportedly saw 2 figures descending a hill. When the shadowy forms failed to respond to a challenge to identify themselves, Russian sentries opened fire. The next morning, upon inspecting the bodies, the unit was shocked to discover beings resembling ape-like men, of human stature, and covered entirely with long red hair. Regrettably, owing to the war, the remains could not be transported to Moscow for proper study. Such tales and rumors continued to circulate throughout Asia's mountain ranges in the pages of black and white print, always accompanied by enough uncertainty to allow scholars to dismiss them as fabrications. Yet not every photograph of peculiar Himalayan tracks could be so easily explained away as the mark of a bear. In the years following the Second World War, Western media interest in the Yeti flared once more, this time sparked by the testimony of a man of considerable standing. He was a leading member of a scientific expedition, with no motive to embellish, and his account proved especially startling for 2 reasons. First, it was corroborated by his fellow team members, including a respected surgeon. Second, the photographs he produced were so bizarre that they defied all easy dismissal. 6 years after the end of the Second World War, and having completed his military service in Hungary, Eric Shipton had long since returned to the passion of his youth, mountain exploration. In the early winter of 1951, while crossing the Menlung Glacier just north of Tibet's southern frontier with Nepal, he and his party came upon a footprint so extraordinary it defied belief. Puzzled, Shipton and the expedition's surgeon, Michael Ward, photographed the tracks. One measured some 18 inches in length and just under 13 inches across, its shape altogether peculiar. 4 broad toes and a gigantic, almost circular big toe. From his own observations, Shipton was convinced these impressions had been made by a bipedal creature, not by any quadruped such as wolf or bear. Shipton reasoned that the only animal with a vaguely similar foot might be the orangutan, though its toes were far longer, and the species did not inhabit Tibet. His local Sherpa companion, Tenzing Norgay, was adamant that the prints belonged to the Yeti, a creature capable, he insisted, of leaping across crevasses and using its toes to grip the far side securely. Tenzing went further, recounting that he had seen a Yeti himself 2 years earlier, at a distance of but 25 yards, a half-man, half-beast figure, clothed in reddish-brown hair save for its face. From that encounter, Tenzing had come to believe that the animal feared humans more than humans feared it. When the expedition returned to Britain, Shipton's strange photographs began to circulate widely, and to many they could mean only one thing: proof that the legendary Yeti truly roamed the Himalayas. Yet the Natural History Department of the British Museum quickly rejected the evidence. Leading experts there insisted that the tracks must have been left by a langur monkey native to the Himalayas. Critics countered immediately, pointing out that langurs moved chiefly upon 4 legs, and that their long, narrow feet bore no resemblance to the rounded 4 or 5 toes shown in Shipton's photographs. A more imaginative interpretation came from the Dutch zoologist Bernard Heuvelmans, who in 1952, 1 year after Shipton's discovery, published a series of articles in Paris. He reminded readers that in 1934, a German paleontologist and geologist named Ralph von Koenigswald had purchased several ancient teeth from a Chinese apothecary in Hong Kong. At the time, powdered teeth were valued as medicine. Among them was a massive molar, human in form but twice the size of an adult gorilla's, suggesting that its owner had once stood nearly 12 feet tall. Further evidence dated the giant to nearly 500,000 years ago. Though assumed to be long extinct, the creature, dubbed Gigantopithecus Tway, was eerily similar to many eyewitness descriptions of the Yeti, so much so that sketches of the fossil giant made decades later seem to echo those earlier tales. 2 years afterward, in 1954, the Daily Mail mounted an expedition of its own, intent upon capturing one of the elusive beings alive, or at the very least photographing it. After 15 weeks trudging through Himalayan snows, they found no snowman. Instead, they discovered something else: Yeti scalps, several of them. These objects were long, conical in shape, covered in coarse hair with a stiff ridge running down the center. A number of Tibetan monasteries kept such relics, holding them sacred. Yet scientific investigation would later reveal that at least one of these scalps had been stitched together from fragments of animal hide. Another was taken under scrutiny by the legendary New Zealand mountaineer, Sir Edmund Hillary. A veteran explorer, Hillary himself had once encountered supposed Yeti evidence: tufts of coarse black hair discovered at an elevation of 19,000 feet during his climb in 1951. Superstitious Sherpas, terrified of the omen, had snatched the hair from him and flung it over a nearby cliff before he could preserve it. At last, in the hope of securing a genuine sample of Yeti hide and hair, Sir Edmund Hillary pledged to the monastery that its sacred relic would suffer no harm, then dispatched it to Bernard Heuvelmans in France for analysis. Sadly, this scalp too proved false, though not through deliberate deceit. It had been fashioned from the skin of a Himalayan siro, a mountain goat antelope native to the very snowy ranges where the Yeti was said to dwell. The hide had been stretched and steamed into a conical shape, quite possibly once serving as a ceremonial headdress. Its form recalled what some believed to be the elongated skull of the Yeti, but in truth, the shaping had been carried out many years earlier, and over time the monastery's knowledge of the relic's origins and purpose had simply been forgotten. Because it was ancient and revered, many came to believe it must be the scalp of the Yeti. These scalps thus became yet another unfortunate example of mistaken identity, a gift to skeptics eager to dismiss the Yeti as mere legend. Yet, such a conclusion may well have been premature, for even if explorers seldom laid eyes upon the creatures themselves, throughout the remainder of the 1950s expeditions from Britain, Europe, Russia, and even America continued to record extraordinary tracks in the high snows. Among them was a French cleric, Abbé Pierre Bourdet, who during his 1955 expedition traced 3 separate lines of strange footprints. Soon after came Major Lester Davies, a former Royal Air Force pilot who had flown combat missions against the Japanese in Malaya. In the post-war years, he had become an accomplished mountaineer and head of a mountain rescue team. Like his colleagues, he photographed enormous, unidentifiable tracks. This same era also saw the involvement of Tom Slick, a Texas oilman turned adventurer. In 1957, fascinated by the growing collection of reports, he financed and personally led a celebrated reconnaissance. His team interviewed numerous eyewitnesses, uncovered odd tracks, and collected hair thought to be from the Yeti, though, like so many others, they never achieved direct contact with the beast itself. In this first journey, Slick was injured, and thus engaged two brothers, Peter and Brian Byrne, to continue the search later that year. It was Peter who uncovered further relics said to be linked to the Yeti, yet another scalp, and most tantalizing of all, a skeletal hand preserved at the Pangboch Monastery in Nepal. The next chapter of the tale is shrouded in contradiction. Some early accounts allege that Peter Byrne had removed a thumb and a finger bone from the hand without the monk's permission. Later recollections, however, tell a gentler story, that Byrne negotiated with the monastery and obtained the relics in exchange for a substantial donation toward its repair. Either way, the bones were ultimately spirited out of Nepal and carried into India. The next challenge was how to smuggle those fragments through British customs and back to the United Kingdom. Among those Byrne could turn to were the American actor Jimmy Stewart and his wife, Gloria. Aware of the expedition and happening to cross paths with Byrne while traveling in Calcutta, they agreed to help. The bones were hidden in Gloria's undergarments to ensure they would pass inspection unnoticed. Yet, as with the so-called Yeti scalps before them, disappointment soon followed. Authenticating the Pangboch hand and the other relics gathered by Slick's team proved fraught with difficulty. Unlike the scalps, later shown to be fashioned from the hide of mountain goats, these bones, when examined in Britain during the 1950s, and again decades later by the American television program Unsolved Mysteries, yielded no clear conclusion regarding their origin. It was not until the year 2011 that a BBC documentary arranged for one of the finger bones to be retested at the Edinburgh Zoo in Scotland. The result was unequivocal. It was human. Some suggested that the monks may have pieced together human bones to create what appeared to be a Yeti hand. Tragically, the relic itself was stolen from the monastery not long after Unsolved Mysteries aired in 1991, preventing any further tests on the remaining fragments. Thus, the Pangboch hand became yet another reason for skeptics to dismiss the Yeti as myth. Wounded during his first journey, Tom Slick nonetheless financed 2 further Yeti expeditions, though he did not personally accompany them. In the end, the 1957 venture produced little more than 3 sets of human-like tracks, a handful of scat samples, a few tufts of hair, and the bones and hide thought to belong to the Yeti. Even with 3 blue-tick hounds, a breed renowned for its tracking skill, the following year's return brought only an unverified tale from 2 Sherpa porters, who claimed they had encountered a timid Yeti. By the time of his 3rd journey into Nepal in 1959, no firmer evidence had been gathered than in the 2 attempts before. The Texan adventurer, weary of the expense and disappointment, abandoned his private sponsorship of Yeti hunts. Yet, in the years that followed, explorers who had never set out with the creature in mind sometimes proved more fortunate. In June of 1970, while climbing Annapurna in northern Nepal, the mountaineer Don Willens witnessed 2 flocks of crows suddenly erupt into panicked flight. The Sherpas accompanying him remarked, with unnerving calm, that it was likely the Yeti which had startled them. With nightfall approaching, Willens did not pursue the matter further, but at dawn the following morning he discovered a line of deep footprints, each the size of his own boot. The trail descended the mountainside to an elevation of some 13,000 feet, then vanished abruptly upon a ridge 15,000 feet high. Willens dismissed the possibility that the marks had been left by a bear. The following night, under the moonlight, he glimpsed a dark figure moving across the slope. He described it as an ape-like being, bounding swiftly uphill upon all 4s. For decades after Willens' strange encounter on Annapurna in 1970, reports of the Yeti continued to emerge, not from trained scientists so much as from the fraternity of mountaineers. In 1974, a particularly chilling story was recorded in the village of Mahermo, high in Nepal's Khumbu region at roughly 15,000 feet. A Sherpa woman claimed she had been attacked by a Yeti. She insisted that the creature had burst into her hut at night, killed several yaks, and struck her unconscious with a single heavy blow. Villagers who rushed to her aid reported finding unfamiliar tracks in the snow about the dwelling. Skeptics suggested a bear, but the Sherpas themselves were unshaken in their conviction that the assailant had been a Yeti. By the late 1970s, strange and oversized tracks were again being photographed by climbers upon Everest and neighboring peaks. In 1978, Reinhold Messner, one of the greatest mountaineers of all time, and the first to summit Everest without supplemental oxygen, reported a personal sighting. Crossing a lonely Himalayan valley at dusk, he claimed to have seen a towering figure, upright upon 2 legs, human in its bearing yet cloaked in black hair. It fled before he could study it closely. But the vision left such a lasting impression that Messner devoted years afterward to the Yeti, ultimately publishing a book in which he argued that the creature might in truth be a rare species of Tibetan bear, capable of walking bipedally for short stretches. With the dawn of the 1980s, the Yeti had become not only an emblem of Himalayan folklore but also a powerful figure in Western popular culture. Expeditions from Japan, Britain, and the United States announced fresh plans to pursue it. In 1983, a British television crew, filming in the Himalayas, reported discovering unusual tracks. In 1986, a team of Norwegian climbers photographed prints upon the snowy slopes of Shishapangma in Tibet. Another turning point came in 1991, when the surviving fragments of the Pangbosh hand, smuggled relics of decades before, were re-examined in the United States. NBC's Unsolved Mysteries subjected the bones to testing but could not confirm their origin. Shortly thereafter, the original hand vanished entirely from the monastery, believed stolen, and with it vanished any further chance of verification. By the close of the century, the advent of DNA analysis began at last to yield firmer answers. Many samples of supposed Yeti hair, Yeti scalps, and other monastery relics were tested, and most proved without doubt to belong to known animals: the Tibetan blue bear, the Himalayan siro, or the brown bear of the high ranges. Even as the 21st century dawned, the Yeti remained an enduring fascination. In 2013, a research team led by the British geneticist Brian Sykes analyzed DNA taken from numerous samples said to belong to the creature. Some, remarkably, matched an ancient lineage of polar bear, suggesting that misidentified bears might explain at least part of the reported encounters. Yet others argued that such a conclusion could not possibly account for the wealth of consistent testimony describing an ape-like being, upright on two legs, roaming the snowfields of the high Himalayas. Skeptics maintained that the findings were unconvincing, pointing to possible contamination or errors in decoding ancient DNA. Even so, the study underscored a vital truth, that even in the most remote corners of the Earth, biological mysteries still remain unresolved. Meanwhile, Sherpa tradition has never wavered. For those who live in the shadow of Everest, the Yeti is no legend to be unraveled by science, but a living presence. Monasteries still safeguard relics believed to be its scalps or bones. Elders continue to pass down stories of encounters from generations past. Today, the Yeti occupies a singular place at the crossroads of folklore, science, and cultural identity. For some, it stands as a symbol of humanity's undying thirst for discovery, a reminder that even in the age of satellites and smartphones, uncharted realms still exist. For others, it is nothing more than a familiar animal, mistaken in the moment and inflated into myth by fear and imagination. Whether the Yeti is ultimately revealed as a rare species of bear, a misunderstood remnant of prehistory, or something that lies altogether beyond the grasp of current science, its tale will remain one of the enduring enigmas of the natural world. Number 3. The monsters below the waves. What lies hidden beneath the rippling waves of the ocean? Could prehistoric predators, long believed to have vanished, still endure in the deep, or might there be colossal creatures dwelling far below the surface, elusive and unseen? Truly, there is something in the water. Although the seas cover more than 2/3 of the Earth's surface, 95% of them remain unexplored. To this day, humanity has glimpsed only fragments of that mysterious realm. In fact, more people have set foot upon the moon than have descended into the deepest trenches of the ocean. Among the tens of thousands of new species cataloged each year, a significant portion comes from aquatic environments. The truth is that there may be millions of undiscovered waterborne life forms, and that reality compels us to ask, what else could be lurking in the depths? For centuries, sailors have spoken of terrifying encounters with sea monsters, the most infamous of which is the dreaded kraken. In modern times, however, such tales have been largely dismissed as exaggerations, the kind of seafaring lore told to frighten new recruits or ward off would-be pirates. Yet it may surprise you to learn that sightings of sea monsters today are every bit as common as they were hundreds of years ago. Interest in this subject surged dramatically in the late 1990s when the United States National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, better known as NOAA, detected an ultra-low frequency sound beneath the waves in 1997. The noise was said to be so immense and so powerful that sensors more than 3,000 miles away still registered it. It was given a simple name, the bloop. At first, scientists suspected it might have been produced by some enormous, as yet undiscovered marine animal, one larger than any species ever recorded. Yet by 2012, Further investigation revealed that the sound had originated from sea ice fracturing and grinding against the ocean floor. Even so, human imagination had already been stirred, and tales of sea monsters quickly found new life. The legend of the Kraken has endured for thousands of years. Homer's Odyssey mentions a beast of similar description, but it was not until 1755, in The Natural History of Norway, by Norwegian author Erik Pontoppidan, that the creature was given its first detailed account. Pontoppidan wrote that, according to fishermen, the monster was so vast that it could easily drag a vessel weighing 5,000 tons down into the depths, its tentacles long enough to reach the decks and snatch sailors from their posts. Such stories were long regarded as exaggerations, unworthy of serious scientific attention. Yet, in 1857, the legend began its slow transformation into scientific fact. A Danish naturalist named Japetus Steenstrup studied the beak of a giant squid that had washed ashore. Measuring more than 3 inches across, larger than any previously known specimen, it hinted at an animal of staggering size. When 2 massive tentacles later drifted onto a beach in the Bahamas, Steenstrup famously declared that the Kraken was indeed real. In modern times, the giant squid has been recorded at lengths of up to 15 meters, with some estimates suggesting they may even grow as large as 20. Astonishingly, the very first photographs and film footage of this colossal creature were captured only as recently as 2004. Could they truly have been responsible for the legendary tales of old? The likelihood is slim. Giant squids have never been observed at the surface. They dwell at depths between 800 and 1,600 meters and, despite their fearsome appearance, prey only on smaller animals, making them in reality relatively gentle. It seems probable that the Kraken myth was little more than an exaggeration of their size and ferocity. Yet who can say with certainty what else might lurk in the abyss? After all, the legend of the Kraken predated humanity's very knowledge of the squid's existence, which raises the question, what, precisely, first seeded that ancient legend? In 2004, a GPS tracking device that had been attached to the dorsal fin of a female great white shark measuring nearly 9 feet in length was discovered washed up on a beach in Australia. Remarkably, it was found only 4 months after it had been deployed, and just a few miles from the location where the shark was originally tagged. When wildlife conservationists analyzed the stored data, they uncovered something strange. During the first 4 months, the shark had remained close to the coast, rarely descending below 600 feet. Yet at 4 o'clock in the morning on December 24th, the animal suddenly plunged over the edge of the continental shelf, reaching a depth of 1,900 feet in less than 2 minutes, faster than the shark itself could possibly swim. The initial assumption was that the device had simply detached from the shark, but this theory was quickly dismissed. If the shark could not have descended that quickly, then the tag certainly could not have sunk at such a rate either. More importantly, during the entire descent, the temperature reading remained stable at 78 degrees Fahrenheit, far warmer than the 46 degrees previously recorded when the device was still attached to the shark's fin. Moreover, had the tag simply fallen away and drifted into deeper waters, the reading should have shown a sudden and dramatic drop in temperature. Upon examination, researchers found the casing lined with a substance believed to be stomach acid. This final clue suggested the shark had almost certainly been killed and swallowed whole by something larger. The question was, what? Some suggested the culprit might have been a killer whale. Orcas are known to hunt sharks, and they are certainly large enough, reaching lengths of more than 32 feet. Yet, the problem with this explanation was depth. The deepest recorded dive of a killer whale is a mere 850 feet, less than half the depth documented in this case. 10 years later, in 2014, marine biologists claimed to have solved the mystery, proposing that the predator had been another, much larger great white shark. But this too was problematic. First, cannibalism among great whites is exceedingly rare, especially in the food-rich waters surrounding Australia. If it had been a territorial dispute, that would run contrary to everything we know about these intelligent predators, which typically resolve conflicts through ritualized gestures and non-violent displays. Finally, the temperature reading remained inconsistent with such an explanation. At 78 degrees Fahrenheit, it was some 14 degrees warmer than the maximum stomach temperature of a great white, which averages around 64 degrees. These discrepancies have led some to believe that the true culprit was Megalodon, perhaps the largest and most powerful fish ever to have lived, with an estimated length of 60 feet. Although the scientific community is largely in agreement that the Megalodon went extinct around 2.5 million years ago, many continue to reject that conclusion, pointing to countless eyewitness reports of colossal sharks from across the globe. Most of these sightings are dismissed as cases of mistaken identity, often confused with whale sharks or basking sharks. But that has not deterred many from believing that the megalodon still prowls the oceans. After all, in 1875, a British vessel, HMS Challenger, hauled up a megalodon tooth while dredging the seabed. When dated using manganese dioxide buildup, the tooth was found to be only about 11,000 years old. This left many wondering, why would such a dominant predator as the megalodon have vanished at all? In any case, the megalodon is not the only species thought to have gone extinct, yet rumored to still roam the seas. In 1915, the German submarine U-28 experienced a terrifying encounter with a massive marine reptile. Commander Freiherr Georg von Forstner recorded the details in the ship's log on July 30th. 1915, our U-28 had fired a torpedo which struck and sank the British steamer Iberian, a vessel carrying a rich cargo across the North Atlantic. The ship went down so swiftly that its bow rose almost vertically into the air. Moments later, the entire Iberian disappeared. The wreckage remained beneath the waves for approximately 25 seconds at an unmeasurable depth, when suddenly there was a violent explosion that hurled debris, and with it, a gigantic aquatic creature, some 80 feet above the surface. At that moment, I was in the conning tower with 6 of my officers, including the chief engineer, the navigator, and the helmsman. We all drew one another's attention to this marvel of the sea, writhing and struggling amid the wreckage. We could not identify the creature precisely, but all of us agreed it resembled a marine crocodile about 60 feet in length, with 4 limbs shaped like large webbed feet, a long pointed tail, and a head that tapered sharply. Unfortunately, we were unable to take a photograph, for after only 10 to 15 seconds, the beast sank out of sight once more. If the commander's account was true, then what he described sounded very much like a mosasaur. These were colossal marine reptiles that could grow to lengths of 60 feet. They are believed to have gone extinct some 66 million years ago, yet numerous reports suggest that they have continued to surface off the coast of New Zealand as recently as 2013 and in other waters throughout the past 3 centuries. The scientific community has once again dismissed such sightings, claiming they are nothing more than misidentifications of saltwater crocodiles. But this explanation seems difficult to accept for many eyewitnesses, who insist they observed creatures in excess of 50 feet. By comparison, the largest saltwater crocodile ever recorded measured less than 20 feet in length. Yet the sea monsters said to endure are not limited to creatures of prehistory. In the late 20th century, a Japanese whale research vessel operating in the Pacific reported seeing a vast creature breaking the surface. It was approximately 90 feet long, white in color like an albino whale, yet its form was disturbingly human in shape, with a rounded head and long, tendril-like arms or fins that stretched the length of its body. It had no legs or feet, its lower half tapering into a tail reminiscent of a mermaid. Because of its grotesque, human-like appearance, the crew named it ningen, the Japanese word for human. The entity was reported on several further occasions, most often in the frigid waters of the Southern Ocean near Antarctica, leading many to believe that it inhabits colder climates. Photographs and even video recordings exist, though the poor quality of such evidence has led many to dismiss the creature as nothing more than a hoax. Still, if the ningen does exist, some argue it may represent an undiscovered species of whale. So what are we to make of all these alleged sea monsters? Do the observations contain a grain of truth, or should they be dismissed as nothing more than exaggerations? There is not enough compelling evidence to conclude that any of these beings truly exist. On the other hand, the depths of Earth's oceans remain so opaque and inaccessible that they might as well belong to some remote corner of the solar system. Quite simply, we do not know what lies beneath. What cannot be denied is that the possible existence of massive, predatory, or seldom-seen creatures in our waters has long captivated human imagination. It seems that much remains for us to discover, and perhaps much more for us to fear. Number 4. Bones on Mars. In 1976, as it circled in orbit around Mars, the Viking 1 spacecraft was tasked with photographing the planet's surface and transmitting the images back to Earth for analysis. The purpose was to help NASA select a suitable landing site for its sister craft, Viking 2. By late July of that year, Viking 1 had returned 18 images of a region in the northern hemisphere of Mars, an area never before surveyed. What NASA did not anticipate at the time was that one of those photographs would ignite the imagination of the public for decades to come. Mars, the second closest neighbor to Earth, is a cold and lifeless world, circling the sun at an average distance of 142 million miles. Humanity has yet to set foot on this small, inhospitable planet, or perhaps once did, though not in our era. Without question, Mars represents the next great stepping stone in mankind's journey to explore the solar system. But could the connection between humankind and the red planet be deeper than we have long assumed? At first glance, the photograph from 1976 revealed little more than a vast, unremarkable plateau, barren and featureless. Yet, when examined more closely, in an area of barely 25 square miles, the mission team was astonished to discover something that appeared to be a gigantic face staring back at them. This face seemed to be surrounded by other structures that bore the faint impression of artificial design, fueling speculation among those inclined towards suspicion. After a thorough review, however, NASA officials dismissed the image as nothing more than an optical illusion, and chose to release the photograph nonetheless. The idea of civilizations on Mars had been a fixture of science fiction culture for over a century by that point, and when the image was made public a few weeks later, the imagination of the public erupted. Beyond the face, other features within the same region attracted attention, including a so-called city and a five-sided pyramid. Conspiracy theorists insisted such structures could not have been formed by natural means, though the majority of geologists firmly rejected this. Still, the region soon came to be known as the Cydonia Complex, and the discovery inspired countless scientists and alternative historians alike. The sensationalism surrounding Cydonia eventually waned as the European Space Agency and NASA each released additional photographs of the area, captured from various angles and at higher resolutions. These new images revealed that the face was in fact nothing more than a massive mesa. The official explanation was that the interplay of sunlight and shadow had created the illusion of a human visage. In reality, the formation bore no genuine resemblance at all. Even so, some proponents of the theory of an ancient Martian civilization remained unconvinced, alleging that NASA and ESA had falsified the newer images to conceal the truth. For the most part, such believers were regarded as isolated voices, at least until 2004, when NASA's Spirit and Opportunity rovers touched down on the Martian surface and began sending back a stream of remarkable new photographs. A photograph taken by the Spirit rover in 2005 sat quietly in NASA's archives for nearly a decade, attracting little more than a passing glance. It was not until 2014 that sharper-eyed observers noticed something unusual, and suddenly all attention focused on a particular rock. On closer inspection, it bore a striking resemblance to a human skull, or at the very least, the cranial form of some humanoid creature, half buried in the Martian dust. While it could easily be dismissed as pareidolia, the tendency to perceive familiar shapes in random patterns, even the most ardent skeptics conceded that the likeness to a human skull was nothing short of astonishing. Spirit continued to transmit further anomalies, rocks that appeared to mimic elongated skulls, similar to those unearthed in ancient Mayan sites and across other cultures. More recently, the Curiosity rover returned a host of additional images depicting strange, skull-like formations. These photographs convinced many that ancient civilizations may not only have traveled to Mars but perhaps even originated there. Across the Earth, countless prehistoric cave drawings and medieval paintings have been interpreted by some as depictions of UFO visitations or interactions with beings from beyond our world. While skeptics argue these interpretations are purely subjective, the possibility cannot be entirely dismissed. Tragically, in 2018, the Opportunity rover ceased responding, yet both Spirit and Curiosity continue to beam back images to this very day, and among them are some that remain deeply puzzling. In July of 2014, a former United States Marine, using the pseudonym Captain K, came forward to the press claiming that he had spent 17 of his 20 years of naval service stationed on the Red Planet itself, charged with defending 5 human colonies against native Martian life forms. More astonishing still, he was not the first to go public with tales of these so-called Mars bases. 3 others, Michael Relf, Randy Kramer, and Corey Good, had likewise testified to the existence of facilities on the Moon and on Mars, as well as to a top-secret space program, all seemingly reinforcing Captain K's extraordinary account. Even Laura Magdalene Eisenhower, great-granddaughter of President Dwight D. Eisenhower, has alleged that shadowy organizations once attempted to recruit her into a Martian colonization project, spearheaded by the noted physicist Hal Puthoff. Once again, The photographs returned from the Martian probes helped to fuel this wave of disclosure, as many conspiracy theorists claim to have found evidence within them that suggested the red planet was not at all as NASA had portrayed. They pointed to several specific examples. Sasquatch. This image was said to show a creature resembling Bigfoot running along the side of a hill. While it may simply have been a rock formation, its coloration seemed strangely out of place against the surrounding landscape. The Guardian. In this picture, a small figure appeared to be sprinting toward the rover, one arm raised as though to ward off the intruder. Observers noted in particular the trail of dust behind it, which looked as if it were being kicked up in motion. The Watcher. This eerie photograph showed a small, dark silhouette standing atop a distant cliff, seemingly staring down at the rover as it passed by. Taken just before sunset, the image also appeared to capture some kind of light emanating from afar. Skeptics suggested it might be a form of gas venting, though such activity has never been documented on Mars. UFO. Finally, one image was claimed to capture an unidentified flying object gliding over the Martian surface in the afternoon sky. This case was considered especially compelling, as it could not be easily explained away as a bird or some other natural phenomenon. With numerous other alleged UFO photographs from Mars, the notion that this was merely a photographic anomaly proved difficult to accept. So then, do these images provide irrefutable proof that the probes were not alone on the red planet? Sadly, they do not. The photographs remain far from conclusive. The supposed bones and other anomalies are most likely nothing more than oddly shaped stones. And what of the secret space program and the Martian colonies reported by Captain K and other whistleblowers? Though their stories are undoubtedly intriguing, none of them has ever produced a shred of verifiable evidence to substantiate their claims. Until such proof is forthcoming, we are left only with the official narrative of humanity's gradual exploration of the solar system. Yet one should not allow that official stance to extinguish belief, should one be inclined towards such ideas. The prospect that humankind may once have set foot on Mars, or even traced its origins there, is undeniably alluring. The solar system has endured since time immemorial, and for those who believe in extraterrestrial life, the possibility that one day we might discover the fossil of an alien creature, whether within our own system or beyond, is far from impossible. And let us not forget, what we see in those images may yet hold a measure of truth. Number 5. There is something in the forest. This hunting party had been missing for 3 days. They were 3 local cannery workers who had set out on Friday evening in pursuit of the wild Dall sheep that roamed the high plateaus surrounding the area. The trip was expected to last only 2 days, but when all 3 failed to report for their Monday morning shift at the cannery, their co-workers grew concerned. It was possible they had encountered gray wolves, or perhaps even a bear, and that one of them had been injured. By Tuesday, with still no sign of them, a search party was quickly formed and made its way into the mountains to find their missing friends. The first sign that something terrible had happened came in the form of a hunting bow, snapped clean in 2, lying amid the dense pines. To break a bow in such a way would have required immense force. Searching the area, the rescuers found scattered arrows and several unopened cans of food, but no trace whatsoever of the hunters themselves. Their disappearance unsettled the town, yet the true horror was still to come. A few weeks later, a fisherman at a remote mountain pond spotted something strange beneath the water. As he drew closer, he realized it was the upper half of an adult man. Authorities were alerted and soon arrived at the scene. When the body was recovered, it was confirmed to be one of the 3 missing hunters, but the autopsy brought no comfort to the victim's loved ones. It only raised far more terrifying questions. The local doctor, well accustomed to dealing with wounds inflicted by wild animals or the injuries of climbing accidents, found these marks to be completely different. There were no bite marks, no claw wounds, no signs of a fall. It was as if some invisible force had torn the man's body apart, scattering the remains as if they were nothing. Meanwhile, the other 2 hunters were never seen again, and after that no one attempted to resume the search. The villagers believed that some mysteries were best left unsolved. In September of 1785, an expedition sponsored by the King George's Sound Company set sail from England with the goal of expanding the fur trade in North America. The party numbered 92 and was expected to last more than 3 years. After nearly 2 years of traveling between trading posts across the Atlantic and Pacific, they reached the Alaskan coast in August of 1787. When the weather suddenly turned foul, the expedition decided to anchor in a nearby bay to ride out the storm. In the days that followed, The leaders of the expedition were enchanted by the gentle hills and endless forests surrounding this picturesque anchorage, so much so that they repeatedly praised it in their reports back home. The spot was later marked on maps as Portlock Harbor, named for the commander of the King George, Captain Nathaniel Portlock. More than a century later, an American company constructed a large fish cannery on the bay to serve a vast fleet of fishing vessels, harvesting the region's abundant salmon. A community quickly formed around the plant, made up of workers and those who provided supporting services. Over time, this settlement and its facilities were officially recognized under the name Port Chatham. Yet, almost immediately, the residents of that isolated outpost realized that venturing too deeply into the surrounding wilderness was an unwise gamble. Hunters reported finding the carcasses of moose hacked apart in a brutal fashion, alongside strange tracks and markings. Records kept by the plant's supervisors note that in the year 1905, the entire Aleut workforce suddenly refused to report for duty. They claimed that a dark force dwelled in the forest, something they called Nantianak, that did not wish humans to live within its domain. After a period of negotiation, the Aleut workers eventually returned to their jobs, while the plant owners dismissed their claims as nothing more than a ploy to demand higher wages. But the killings continued, and before long the bodies of the hunters themselves began to appear, or else they vanished without a trace. Gradually, the attacks crept closer and closer to the settlement, until the community could endure no more. In 1936, the cannery shut its doors, and the entire population abandoned Port Chatham forever. One of the most infamous events leading up to this exodus took place in 1931, when a well-liked and friendly resident named Andrew Kamluk was found dead in the forest. Kamluk was a lumberjack, accustomed to spending days at a time alone among the trees, but it was the manner of his death that shocked the community. His body was discovered lying face down, the back of his skull completely crushed. Roughly 15 feet away, a large piece of logging equipment rested at the base of a tree, drenched in the victim's blood. Some attempted to explain that Kamluk might have fallen onto the machinery and struck his head, yet the fact that his body lay a considerable distance from the equipment suggested otherwise, that someone had used it to smash his skull before tossing him aside. The grim reality that it took 3 or 4 strong men to lift the machine afterward only deepened the horror and mystery surrounding Kamluk's fate. Another haunting incident occurred in 1920, when a party of bow hunters came across a houseboat stranded against the banks of the Yukon River, having drifted downstream from the upper reaches. Its exterior was spattered with blood, and when the hunters cautiously entered, they were confronted by a horrifying sight. The vessel's owner lay dying in the darkness of the cabin. His name was Albert Petka, a recluse who had spent his life apart from society, often mooring his boat in the remote reaches near Nulato. With his final breaths, he managed to tell the trembling hunters what had happened to him, and how he was powerless to fend off the death that was closing in. Petka recounted that one evening, while resting inside his cabin, he heard a strange, unearthly howl echoing nearby. Grabbing a weapon, he stepped outside and saw a massive, fur-covered creature slowly advancing toward his boat. He raised his gun to fire, but the beast charged with terrifying speed, effortlessly swatting the weapon aside before seizing him. After delivering a savage beating, it casually dropped him to the ground and continued on its way as though nothing had happened. When the doctor examined him, there was simply no way to explain what kind of creature could have inflicted such devastating internal injuries. The fact that the beast had left him to die rather than consume him only made the manner of his death all the more haunting. Although Port Chatham had been completely abandoned by the late 1940s, reports of a mysterious creature in the surrounding area continued to surface. Local newspapers recorded that in 1968, a goat hunter claimed he had been chased out of the deserted town by a terrifying monster, which had stalked him for days through the forest before attempting to kill him. By 1990, a medical technician in Anchorage recalled being dispatched to Eagle River Jail to treat a 70-year-old native inmate who was suspected of suffering a heart attack. During their conversation, the Aleut man revealed that he had been born and raised in the nearby settlement of Port Graham. The discussion gradually shifted to neighboring Port Chatham, and when the medic asked if he believed the stories of the monster said to dwell there, the prisoner suddenly sat upright, his eyes filled with horror. He told how, in August of 1973, he and 2 members of his tribe had gone hunting at a lagoon in Dogfish Bay. Late one night, they were jolted awake by strange noises just outside their tent. As the 3 men clutched their weapons in fear, they heard heavy, deliberate footsteps circling them, accompanied by labored breathing and the metallic clatter of someone rifling through the pots and pans left outside. The following morning, When they ventured out, they found that the remains of their salmon had vanished, along with several containers of provisions. Imprinted deep in the mud surrounding their tent were enormous, unnatural footprints. For the next 2 nights, they deliberately left food scraps in plain view, and each time, the nameless visitor returned. When the medic asked if it might simply have been a bear, the man firmly denied it. The intruder had never growled menacingly, nor had it tried to tear into the tent despite knowing full well that people were inside. According to him, the creature was Nantianak, and it was only because they had treated it with respect that their lives were spared. As for Nantianak itself, the Aleut people have always insisted that it was not always a monster. In the beginning, it was once a normal human being, but it had been cursed by a dark power, transformed into the tragic creature it has become today. That murderous creature was not the only strange phenomenon tied to the Kenai Peninsula. The Aleut people also speak of the vengeful spirit of a young girl, lured to her death by a mysterious killer. From time to time, terrified warriors would return to their tribe, claiming that a pale-faced woman with long black hair flowing loose had emerged from the cliffs beside them, reaching out with icy hands in an attempt to drag them to their doom. The region surrounding Port Locke and Port Chatham is a labyrinth of endless caves and deep glacial valleys. Hunters in the area have reported following human-like tracks measuring up to 18 inches in length. Seasoned woodsmen came to believe that the being which left those prints was stalking and bringing down unfortunate moose or caribou. Could it be that in some untouched wilderness, far removed from human reach, a lost branch of ancient mankind still survives, evolving at a slower pace than the rest of us? Might the events of the past centuries serve as evidence that one day the two species will be forced into open confrontation? Or are all these accounts nothing more than mistakes and misinterpretations? Wherever you go in the world, every community and every society has its legends and supernatural tales. Whether it is ghosts, monsters, or entities from beyond, we all grow up with stories of things lurking at the edges of our natural world, dangerous beings forever waiting just beyond the firelight. And that is the story for today. Thank you for watching until the very end. If you enjoy videos like this, be sure to subscribe to the channel so that you receive a notification each time we release a new one. 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 Time we release a new one.